Greetings, dear viewers. This is the CrossMoto channel. The British School of Motorcycle Engineering has given the world a lot of interesting two-wheeled machines and a whole list of companies that produced motorcycles. For a long time, the British were at the forefront of progress, but in the late 60s and early 70s, they lost the competitive and technological battle to the Japanese motorcycle industry. One of the companies that reached great heights and then fell into oblivion was Douglas, and its history will be discussed in this video. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy watching. The history of Douglas begins in the distant year of 1982. Two brothers, William and Edward Douglas, founded a company in Bristol that year, which initially specialized in blacksmithing and the production of various metal items. And the brothers named the company after their surname, Douglas Engineering Company. After a short period of time, the guys also mastered foundry production, and overall things were going well for them. The end of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and their products are in demand and bringing in money. Following the Industrial Revolution, the Transportation Revolution was also gaining momentum. Somewhere in a garage, some crazy people would put a steam engine on a bicycle. Elsewhere, a few enthusiasts would cobble together a self-propelled carriage, and others would even create an engine based on new principles and claim that the first steam motorcycle was an inefficient piece of junk. It was a very interesting time, and those who were even a little educated and used their brains understood that the world would never be the same. That era gave us a lot of interesting things, and one of the inventions of that time was the motorcycle. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was a company in Britain called Light Motors, notable for being the first in the world to equip a motorcycle with a boxer engine. The machine appeared in 1905, was called Fay, and a little later Ferry, and was equipped with a 200cc engine. If you learned about this motorcycle's boxer engine from a documentary, you're awesome. So, Light Motors ordered castings from the Douglas Company. It so happened that in 1907, apparently going through financial difficulties, Light Motors went bankrupt. And, in order not to lose their developments, it was decided to sell them to their partners at Douglas. That same year, the guys from Bristol presented to the public a 350cc opposed motorcycle, which looked very similar to the Ferry. And, at the exhibition in Stanley, a prototype was shown with a 6-horsepower V4 engine with automatic intake valves and a 2-speed transmission. Just think about it, a motorcycle with a V4 engine in 1907. This prototype was not intended for mass production, and most likely served as a demonstration of the company's capabilities. Only about 3 V4 units were made, and most surprisingly, one of the motorcycles has survived to this day. In 1908 at the exhibition, only the updated opposite was briefly shown, now lighter and with a lower engine position. Around 1911, the frame was changed again to position the engine even lower. In the same year, a version of the motorcycle with a so-called women's frame was introduced. In 1912, the automatic intake valves were replaced with mechanically operated valves. The engine displacement increased to 500 and 600 cc, and the power ranged from 3.5 to 6 horsepower. In the same year, Douglas motorcycles performed very well at the Tourist Trophy on the Isle of Man. Harry Bashel won the Junior Tourist Trophy on a 350cc. Douglas Edward Keecum came second, and George Stewart finished fourth. And in the same year for the Williamson Company, which also produced motorcycles for some time, Douglas built an 8-horsepower 970cc flat twin engine. Initially, it was a liquid-cooled unit, but by 1913 it was also available with air cooling. In 2013, a version of the flat twin engine with water cooling, bored out to 1070cc, was used to build a two-seater cycle car. The car had a drive shaft, and apparently the engine was mounted along the axis of the car. The Douglas cycle car cost 200 pounds sterling. The outbreak of the war forced production to stop, but in 1919 the little car returned with a 1.2-liter engine. At first the vehicle cost 400 pounds, and a little later it was 500. That was a huge amount, and as a result, by 1922 only about 100 cars were produced. In 1914, the company introduced the elegant 250cc opposed engine Model X with a so-called ladies' frame. But the model didn't last long on the market, and there was a reason for that. From the very beginning of production, the company's products proved to be reliable and durable. Thanks to these qualities, Douglas motorcycles found wide use in the British Army during World War I. Initially, the military ordered 25,000 units, but by the end of World War I, 70,000 Douglases had been delivered to the troops. That's an enormous number. For comparison, during World War II, the Germans produced only 20,000 BMW R75s and Zundap KS 750s each. Photographs show that the Douglas was used in many operations, from the first clashes at Mons to the armistice in France. On the beaches of Gallipoli, in Africa and Mesopotamia, the motorcycle was used by all Allied forces. The Douglases served in the Army, the Navy, and the newly formed Royal Flying Corps. In the Army, it was widely used by engineers, artillerymen, medics, as well as by the staff as a means of communication. The post-war period, the company faced it confidently, standing on its feet. In 1920, the company was headed by William Wilson Douglas, the son of one of the company's founders. He participated in the Isle of Man races in 1911, and after the war, he was in the United States and Canada, promoting the company's products. In 1921, Douglas introduced his first overhead valve model, the S1, to the public. It was quite an expensive and premium design, a 500cc engine, a 3-speed gearbox, effective brakes, and even a special starting system with heating. Some sources claim that as early as 1922, the Douglas RA model used a disc brake, but that's not entirely accurate. Yes, outwardly it looks very much like a disc brake, but the brake pad pressed against the outer surface of the disc, rather than squeezing it from the sides. Brakes. The RA were considered very good for their time, but they were prone to grabbing. These motorcycles participated in the tourist trophy races on the Isle of Man, and the riders, in order to avoid brake grabbing, would add a little oil to the friction material.
Great plan, you Walter. Just awesome, if I understood it correctly.
Also, in the early 1920s, he received a royal warrant to supply motorcycles to Princes Albert and Henry. And at this point, it's necessary to clarify what exactly this warrant is. In fact, it's an important document that allows the supplier, in our case Douglas, to advertise the fact that they supply their products to the royal family, thereby increasing the brand's prestige. In the mid-period, Douglas motorcycles became popular in off-road racing. Initially, racers preferred the RA model, but very soon the company introduced two special motorcycle models, the DT5 and DT6, with opposed engines of 500 and 600 cc, respectively. DT. By the way, DT stands for dirt track. They dominated off-road racing for about 3 years. In 1929, the most successful year in off-road racing, 1,200 DT series motorcycles were sold. These races were most popular in Australia, while in Britain itself, by the 1930s, people preferred speedway, for which the long wheelbase Douglas bikes weren't quite suitable. Before the introduction of the Endeavour model in 1934, which had a longitudinally mounted flat twin engine, all Douglas models were equipped with a transversely mounted engine. In this regard, the company was very conservative. Other British manufacturers experimented with singles, V-twins, and inline engines, but not Douglas, and this would later come back to haunt them. But in the 1910s and 1920s, Douglas produced powerful, reliable engines and motorcycles. And since the company was the first after Light Motors to manufacture Boxer motorcycles, it had a huge influence on other motorcycle companies. The traditional Douglas layout was copied by several motorcycle manufacturers in the 1910s and 1920s. In the United States, this was the Model O from Indian and the Model W from Harley-Davidson. Douglas engines also had a huge influence on German Boxer engines. Bosch acquired a license to produce these engines and supplied them to other brands. The designer at Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, Martin Stolle, had a Douglas motorcycle, and he was impressed by its power and reliability. And in 1919, he developed the BMW M2B15 engine, which was based on the Bosch Douglas. And this engine was supplied to such German motorcycle companies as Corona, Bison, Heller, SMP, and Victoria. In the 1930s, the company produced a range of motorcycles with engine capacities of 350, 500, and 600 cc in sport, touring, and dirt track versions. The largest model during this period was the H32, 32 being the model year, with an engine capacity of 750 cc. And so, in 1934, the very conservative Douglas introduced the Endeavour model, the company's first model with a longitudinally mounted Boxer engine in the frame. Apparently, the British took notice of the successes of the German motorcycle industry. Resting on their laurels played a cruel joke on the company from Bristol. The Germans, who had been copying Douglas engines in the late 1910s, had moved far ahead by the mid-1930s, while Douglas was facing huge problems. The Douglas Endeavour cost about £72, which was roughly 10-12 pounds more expensive than the company's classic models of those years, or about the same as a 1-liter V-twin matchless. The advertisements praised the Endeavour as the best motorcycle, a masterpiece on 2 wheels, almost a car, hinting at a drive shaft, but it didn't help. The British public met the model with hostility. Endeavour lagged behind the Germans in terms of performance, and since the design was new for the company, it also had a number of teething problems. Conservative fans of the brand decided that Endeavour was a piece of crap. Now, classic models, that's a different story. As a result, only 50 units of this motorcycle were produced in the side valve and DC models of 1937 and 1938. The company returned to the old Douglas layout in the 1930s and also tried to design and launch a car series. But something went wrong, and they ended up creating only 6 prototypes. By that time, the company was already on the verge of bankruptcy and was handed over to the aircraft manufacturer Bond Aircraft, an engineering company. And during the war, this company used Douglas's resources to produce some parts for fighter planes and to manufacture portable generators. And these very generators used the same opposed engine. In 1945, the war ended. Britain was among the victors, but it's one thing to be a winner and another thing to actually benefit from it. Post-war Britain couldn't afford to live in luxury, and from the documentary about opposed engines, hopefully you've watched it, we know very well that a Boxer engine is inherently more expensive to produce than singles or inline engines. At that time, the British market needed small displacement, simple and cheap motorcycles, and that's why the Birmingham Small Arms Bentham, a copy of the German DKW as of 1945, became wildly popular. Douglas still had a fairly large stock of Boxer engines, which were originally intended for generators, but the war ended, the need for generators disappeared, and having these engines in stock allowed Douglas to return to motorcycle production as early as 1946. Before that, towards the end of the war, the DV60 model was presented to the Ministry of Defense, but only 3 units were produced. In 1946, the T35 model appeared, featuring a longitudinal 350cc 20 horsepower Boxer engine. In this design, the British were inspired by German BMWs. The motorcycle turned out to be quite raw and had a number of teething problems, most of which were resolved. In 1948, the Mark III model was produced in deluxe sport and competition versions. In 1949, a transitional Mark IV model appeared in touring and sports versions, and in 1950, the 5th generation was introduced. Mark V was produced from October 1950 to June 1954. However, as you remember, a boxer engine is an expensive pleasure. The number of motorcycles produced was extremely small. For example, in 1953, only 141 motorcycles and 126 units were produced. In the first half of 1954, the racing models 480 and plus 90 were released in a very limited series. The numbers in their names indicated the guaranteed speed in miles per hour. The power of their engines was 24 and 25 horsepower, respectively. The last opposed engine model in the company's history was the Douglas Dragonfly, which was produced in only 1,457 units between 1955 and 1957. It is worth noting that in 1949, Douglas tried to expand their range towards simpler and more affordable machines. During his vacation in Italy that same year, managing director Claude McCormick saw a Vespa and soon arranged with Piaggio for licensed production of scooters in Bristol. In 1949, a scooter, built by Vitali but bearing the Douglas badge, was present at the Earl's Court exhibition. But in fact, production only began in April 1951. The first Vespas were almost entirely produced in the United Kingdom. Later, the company was used more as an assembly plant. In 1957, the history of Douglas motorcycles came to an end. Around 126,000 Vespas were assembled at the plant until 1965. Conservatism and rigidity ultimately killed the once legendary British motorcycle brand. That's the story of Douglas. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, and recommend the story to good people. Special thanks to everyone who supports the channel financially. See you next time.